seem like we're going to have that many people, but we were doing that in a place where I was with like 20 or 30 people sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good policy. That's usually what we adopt here. And like when you guys are answering questions eloquently, I'll be muting myself too. So I love that. It looks like Andre's here. So, oh no, I'm in the dark. I think our whole crew that we're expecting is here. Sarah Jenkins said that they might be joining us, but we'll just keep our fingers crossed to see if they pop up. So yeah, thank you guys again for joining us. I think our live stream is active. So for anyone watching, please feel free to, on our Facebook live stream, ask questions, insert comments, insert words of support for these very talented artists and our very special guest. And then we can, you know, just kind of add in this content to our talk tonight. So for anyone that doesn't know me, and Karen, I'm just meeting you, so I'm excited. My name is Heather Bowling. I am the director and curator here at the Brea Gallery. Hello, Andre. So nice to see you. And so the exhibit that we're talking about today that features all of you is Nature versus Nurture, which is an exhibition that it's kind of been brewing in my head for a little while now. And, you know, due to the pandemic, we've had to play kind of like musical exhibitions and move things around. And so we're just really thrilled to be putting this together. And with a group of you all, there's 10 artists in the show. And I'm glad I was able to get 4 of you here tonight. Thank you guys. I know we all have such crazy lives right now for like so many reasons. And it's kind of like a real treat to get everyone together, even if it's virtually. But for the exhibit, just to give like a very brief synopsis, and you know, we'll be talking about tonight like kind of you all's interpretations and responses to the show as well. But this topic kind of came from, you know, a concept of the balance of our relationship with humanity's relationship with nature. And so it kind of brought about this idea of, you know, artists that spend their time in nature. You know, there's a lot of us that have kind of retreated into the wilderness during the pandemic to find some peace. And really just artists who take the time to reflect upon their experiences with the climate crisis and their responses to that. And I think it's so beautiful and unique the way each of you have interpreted these topics. And so I want to just kind of dive into that a little bit tonight. And Karen, thank you again for joining us from UCLA. And I'd love to just kind of get your input as we go, your input about the topics that these artists are exploring, about the importance of bringing this information to the attention of the public. You know, a lot of people have said, oh, this is a timely exhibition. And it is, but it's also been kind of timely for some time now, for quite a while now. And so I think that it's just like a continuing dialogue we have to have. Right. And so to start, I'd love to kind of just go around and have each of you briefly introduce yourselves. Maybe you could talk about like how long you've been practicing, what your primary mediums are, and just give everyone watching like a little bit of like a snapshot of your bio. And that way, when we start diving into talking about the work, they have like a little bit of a reference point. And we did share some information with Karen ahead of time, but I think that this dialogue will just really kind of evolve here together with the group. So Natasha, if you want to go first, if you don't mind, that would be awesome. Just give everyone a little intro.
Thank you, Heather. Hi, everyone. It's great to have this talk together. I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we'll have. My name is Natasha. I am primarily working with photography, and I've been working a lot with the topics of the relationship of body and environment, so kind of naturally transitioned into talking about environment, more kind of focusing on the environment itself and kind of our general impact on it as humanity. In the show, I'm showing the work that kind of combines some alternative processes with photography, like the classic silver gelatin print with the cyanotype. Yeah, so that's the brief intro. I don't know, is that too brief or not, but I guess I'll dive in more when we'll get into the topic. So thanks, Heather.
Perfect. Very brief. I love it. Stacey, would you like to give yourself a little intro? You're on mute, just so you know.
I'm so good at this. Okay. So my name's Stacey, and I'm working primarily in the show that the work in the show is primarily charcoal and paper mediums. And I started to, I live in Southern California. I started to really take notice of the increase in the wildfires and started to do a lot more hiking. One of the first things actually I did when I moved to Los Angeles was I went on a hike after a burn, and then that kind of sat on the shelf for a lot of years. And then I, back in the, 2010 or something like that, I can't remember, but went on a hike where I really was just like so impacted by the devastation of the landscape by the fire. And then also experiencing how quickly things started to regenerate, or the way that certain plants survived the fire. And so that really set me off on this whole other piece of wanting to understand California ecology, because I grew up in the Midwest and the plants we have there are very different, and what they require to survive is very different. So I just started reading lots of books about plants and spending a lot of time out looking in nature, and that material, those experiences really started to inform what I wanted to make in the studio. And I went from doing really like traditional, classically trained, like oil paintings, to doing all these drawings that were a lot more abstract and kind of playing around with the ideas of reconfiguring nature, literally and figuratively. So that's the work that I've been presenting that I'm presenting in the show. Really is just an exploration of that, and to the point of even collecting charcoal from fire locations and actually doing drawings with that found material, and seeing like what can I do with that. So some of the drawings in the show actually use found charcoal as well. So that's been, I feel like I'm like so on the tip of the iceberg with where I want to go with the work, but it's been really enjoyable to process climate change this way, if that's possible.
Thank you. Yeah, I think
Sure.
all of these bodies of work that you all are doing, and you have a huge variety of work, all of you, it's really just about processing it, right? And like trying to come to terms with it, and also get out the information, get out the knowledge and the urgency. Luciana, would you like to introduce yourself? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Well, my name is Luciana Baik. I'm originally from Argentina, and I've lived in California for the last 16 years. And well, my work deals with environmental issues, and particularly how the environment adapts to the human world, and also how the human world, or the built world, adapts to the environment. So it's this relationship between the natural world and the human world. I work with mixed media works, with photography, painting, video, photography, 3D installations. In this particular exhibition at Brea Gallery, I'm presenting my mixed media works, and in which I work with photography, and then I work over it with soft pastels. And mainly my work in this exhibition is icebergs, and they're all imaginary icebergs that I created digitally with photographs that I took of the mountains of California, photographs that my friends have sent me from their trips to Alaska, from Iceland. Then I also combined the photographs of icebergs from encyclopedias, from the internet. So I combine my personal history to a collective memory. So that's basically what I'm presenting in this show.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Andre, could you give a little intro as well? I know you're sharing a variety of work with us for this show.
Oh, okay. Well, so my name's Andre Woodward, and I've been working with kind of nature and art for about 19, 20 years now. Initially, at my interest started from I worked through college for construction. I mean, I had a lot of jobs, but I worked a lot of construction and landscaping, and noticed how we really manipulate environment to, to our own means, and all the rules and all these requirements you have to go through that are completely unnatural, and how you don't notice it until you kind of see what land was before, so, a home or something, or like a housing tract was there, and then to what they do, basically clearing the whole spot, clearing everything, almost excavating, feet worth of dirt, and then, putting these weird things that are sort of scripted, like the scripted, I don't know, the scripted like track, and each track's different. And so I was kind of like amazed by that, and how we view the world and as something we manipulate constantly. And to do that, we don't really see the results, like, or how it impacts it. And so I started studying the things like ecology. And I mean, at my work is not necessarily about climate change, it's more about ecology, and the idea that there's no man and nature. Everything's the same. We're all part, like our environment, these houses, these neighborhoods, buildings, skyscrapers is part of natural evolution. It's human evolution, and it's part of nature. So that's very similar to, say, like a termite mound, or a coral reef. These are all organisms that are building structures, building their environments. It's still part of nature. The problem is, we're conscious enough in how we impact it. We understand that, and it's overlooked so much. But it's like we're conscious of, as like human beings, we know what we're doing. We just choose to ignore like the impacts. And so the work deals a lot with that. And as a result, it's climate. It'll deal with climate change, because we sort of abuse the planet constantly. And so that's it. I mean, I have my work is sculpture, installation, video, sound, photography. I mean, it's a lot of living material, and material that changes over time, like salt crystals and things like that. Sound work. So there's a lot that I use to kind of interpret these ideas. So.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that you highlighted, Andre, that your work is not so much about climate change, but about like our existence as part of like, this is our like natural ecosystem, right? Like this is how we're building our environments that we live, but we are conscious of the catastrophic results of this, especially as time goes on. And so I think that's something important to highlight, because not everyone in this show is dealing with specifically like the climate crisis. There are a huge variety of topics and methodologies in this exhibit, which I think is a wonderful combination for you all. Karen, last but not least, could you please introduce yourself and what type of work you do at UCLA, and maybe like kind of what motivated you to say yes when Ashley and I invited you? That would be excellent. We're so pleased to have you join us tonight.
Yeah, certainly. And I'm so glad to be here with you all. And I'm really excited to hear, each of you artists talk a little bit more about your work. And if there's anything I can, add or inform from the science side, I'd be happy to, but mostly excited to just listen in. So yeah, I'm a professor at UCLA, and I think I've been muted, but I'll just hopefully I'm back now. I'm a professor at UCLA. My research is on understanding kind of climate variability and climate change on a range of different scales. And especially since moving to California for me in 2018, so relatively recently, the California climate itself is just fascinating, and climate change here is, I think, really hits close to home, especially all the wildfire things that Stacey talked about. That's definitely felt like climate change hitting very close to home with some of these wildfires. And so my work is increasingly interested in understanding particularly California climate, how it's changing, and connection to wildfires as well. So yeah, why I'm kind of accepted this invitation and why I'm excited to be here is that, well, in general, art is awesome, and I love going to art shows, but more generally on this topic, it's very interesting being a climate scientist now with climate change happening so quickly, because I think a lot of us scientists are kind of like, whoa, like we've actually been saying, I mean, not me personally, but climate scientists have been saying since the last 30 years that climate change is happening. And we can see that there really has not been a lot of action. Even the kind of limited action that we've seen now, to me, actually feels optimistic because it's more than we've seen in the past. And so now what I'm observing as a climate scientist, rather than spending years on the science, is that there's just this really interesting, and maybe this is especially true in California and LA, but kind of convergence of people really across fields thinking about climate in the way that's related to their field. So we have people in urban planning thinking about how to deal with building cities that are going to be resilient to climate change. We have people thinking about mental health crises related to climate change. So the loss and the grief that people feel when they see their favorite place has been affected by climate change, or that they don't get winter in their town anymore, things like that. And then similarly for you guys, all thinking about climate change as artists, and how do you process it and express this information about the changing climate. So yeah, I think it's just really interesting to engage across all of those axes. And as a climate scientist, we often put things in numbers, right? So we say, okay, the world is warming this much, or LA is warming this much, precipitation will change this much. But that doesn't really, most of us don't feel numbers very much. But I think that people feel, art much more. And so I think it is really powerful to move this information to the artistic sphere. And so, yeah, I'm just excited to be here with you guys and talk more about that.
Awesome, thank you. I think that first of all, I'm excited that you're excited, but I think that that's kind of why we had formulated this idea of having someone from your department in UCLA join us, because I've had dialogues with people kind of in the science field where they're saying, we're hit over the head with statistics, and there's all this information that can be gleaned by the public about the climate crisis, and we see the effects of it. We see drought, we see fires, we see hurricanes, we see everything across the globe, not just here in our backyards. And as you said, people respond differently to different types of information. And so some people look at stats and numbers and all of this, and they really that impacts them, and they understand that, and they take it to heart. But one of the primary reasons we wanted to put on this show, and honestly, I could do a different iteration of the show every time slot for the next 4 years. I could invite a new batch of artists that approach this differently every couple months, but really just to kind of bring these topics to the forefront. And again, I keep saying climate crisis, me keep talking about you know, the severity of it. But as Andre pointed out, like, it's also just about a relationship. It doesn't have to be like a negative impact. It can also be a positive impact. The work and the concept behind it can also be hopeful and not just depressing, you know? And I think that that is something that, with the variety of ways that you all are kind of exploring these topics. And, you know, I mentioned to Luciana when we did a studio visit that I feel like she like tricks people into like being really enticed by the beauty and the color and the saturation of her work. And then when you hear her talk about it and talk about her personal relationship to it, as well as kind of the global scope of like these imaginary landscapes that, you know, these icebergs may not exist in 20 years. And so we will have to fabricate them from our memory, from our imagination, if we want to view them. I think that that allows like the average visitor, so to speak, to kind of really tap into and spend some time with our connection to the planet, whether it's positive or negative. You know, like, you can take some of the work on view here and really just take a moment and appreciate the beauty and wonder, what is this drawing of, or what is this photograph of, and want to go to that location and feel peace and joy without acknowledging the, like, oh no, the lake is gone. You know, like Natasha's work about you know, the receding waters in California, the natural bodies of water, the aqueducts, the reservoirs. I think that some of my visitors have come in and been like, oh, I know that place. I go hiking there. You know, right off the bat, they identify it because it brings them joy and they have a relationship with it. But then it allows them to take a step back and understand the nuance of her work and say, oh, okay, I can see right in front of me the changes to these bodies of water. And, you know, what can I do? How can I be involved? You know, getting those gears turning feels very poignant. And that was a huge motivator for us. And I know that I know a lot of you have come to see the show. I know that you've seen the work online. I know that this is the first time we get to kind of chat and interact together. But I really wanted to have like the rest of our chat be like a little more informal. I don't want to like keep calling on you guys like I'm a teacher. But I would love to kind of just open it up and, you know, ask if you all have had like moments. Sorry, my light keeps turning off. It thinks I'm not here. If you all have had moments of connection with other works in the show, or kind of had like springboard thoughts. Stacey mentioned earlier when we were kind of catching up that she feels really inspired by the other artists in this show. And I think it's like a really wonderful opportunity to talk amongst each other. And you don't have to just comment on each other's work. It could be someone who's not present tonight. But just to get your ideas about either specific works maybe you saw or the show as a whole. I'd love to hear like kind of how that may or may not have informed your practice, or just kind of informed like how you're looking at the topics, right? Some people's works are overlapping. I know Stacey and Isabel both work on the wildfire topics in very, very different ways. And for me, that intersection is really exciting. And so I'd like to open it up to you guys. If someone wants to kind of offer up any thoughts, I would love to hear them. All right, now. Anyone? I will call on you.
I'm gonna just talk because
Stacey.
I don't know that I'm gonna remember everyone's names because I'm not good with that. But I do want to say that the thing to me that's interesting about the show, one of the things that's interesting to me about it is how walking through it, I can see there's like threads that connect all the pieces, the way it's laid out, and how I can be looking at one person's work and then the next piece is connected by color, but it's not just the color. There's a kind of a nod to something in the subject matter. And I wish I had thought to think this through better beforehand and like make notes of like which pieces. But even when I just first walk into the space, that Andre has a piece in that first room, and it's one of the plant forms that's in concrete. And then Natasha, your work is on the wall behind that, and the threads that connect the concrete block to the tree form. You know, like there's lines that connect. There's lines that are connecting that remind me of the piece that's of mine that's in that room, because that piece is kind of fragmented. And then off to the left is one of Luciana's pieces, I believe. I remember this. There's like strong blue color and water, and then there's a piece of mine there that's got sort of the inspiration for that piece was water also. So it's like there's kind of interesting like conversation that's happening in that room with about water and about fragmentation, and you know, and Natasha's piece is speaking to the water pieces across the room, and I feel like there's kind of this interesting like dialogue happening. It's like I walked into a conversation, like, you know, you're at a party and there's a bunch of people sitting there chatting, and you walk into the room and you're like, oh yeah, what's everybody talking about? It's like, oh, they're talking about water and the fragmented nature, and the, you know, it's like that's, and those kinds of things are happening throughout the show, which is part of what I think is really successful about the exhibition, is that the installation is sensitive to the content and trying to create an opportunity for the viewer to think about what they're seeing maybe in a different way. So and that, you know, like the backdrop, or to bring Karen into this, just like the backdrop of science with all of this, like a lot of times as an artist, it's really easy to feel like I'm not doing anything important. I don't know about anybody else, but I mean, it's important to me, right? Like I need to do this work. It's important to my like well-being, and it's something that is not an option for me. But also a lot of times I feel like, well, what am I really doing to make the world a better place? You know, like what am I really doing to like, you know, we're on this trajectory of climate crisis, and, you know, all of these like culmination of, you know, a lot of what feel like terrible things. And yet I still am compelled to make this work. And then I want to think about like, well, how can I take what I'm making and position it in such a way that it's going to help other people maybe learn something, or, you know, show up to picking up their garbage, or, you know, like it becomes overwhelming sometimes for me to feel like there's purpose in what I'm.
I think you might be frozen, Stacey. I'm sorry. Or maybe I'm frozen. No one knows. Well, if she unfreezes, we'll let her finish her thought. Absolutely. I think that some of the commentary that she's sharing is really poignant, and that a lot of artistic individuals feel, and, you know, I myself have felt that way as a curator putting the show together. Like, is this important? It feels important. It feels like the right thing to do. It feels like, you know, it should be brought to the forefront. And perhaps, you know, not all of the exhibitions we do here are quite so serious or solemn or intellectual or what have you. But, you know, having this venue, having this space, and having connections with artists and opportunities to meet new artists, I think that bringing that in and having our visitors be able to engage and interact is pretty important, even if it doesn't feel like it. So I definitely resonate with what she was saying. I'm gonna let Stacey back in. I think she's back. Hi, Stacey. Sorry you got cut off. The internet doesn't.
Oh, our internet just died or something. It's fine. I was just running my mouth anyways, but anyways, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your thoughts on that. I really think that, I don't want to like quiz you guys on like which works, but I know when I visit other exhibitions or when I have studio visits, I have a lot of like brand new, fresh ideas, and it kind of fuels what I'm doing. And so it's great to see that you're seeing these like, artistic dialogues between the work and things like that. Does anyone else want to like comment on someone else's work, or even like, Natasha, we talked about you're seeing your work in kind of a different context for this exhibit. This is a brand new series for you, and it's displayed in a different way. And, has that informed where you're going to go with this series, or what your thoughts are on this topic?
About that first room that I first entered, and not only I saw my own work in the different way that I actually didn't really envision it fully in that particular kind of display that you created for it, but I definitely felt a dialogue, and I really loved the piece, Andre's piece in front of it, and I think it made a lot of sense to me with the tree encased in concrete, and that probably that was one of the things that made me think of LA River encased in concrete, that I'm planning to think further into the direction of the water and how water systems that we have in California, especially in Southern California, are kind of not sustainable long term. Or Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels that it's not sustainable. I actually had kind of a question that I wanted to address, Karen, if that's okay. I was thinking about the responsibility of artists. It kind of probably piggybacking on the thought of what artists do or cannot do, or do we do anything useful? Because when I was making this work, I was thinking about like, I am showcasing the levels of reservoirs. Do I have the responsibility to like find the exact levels that disappeared in this particular year? Or like, do I need to have that analytical aspect to the work? Because also we live in this post-truth world where the misinformation about all kinds of things are just so prominent that it feels like there's an extra responsibility to not only convey some idea, but convey it kind of fully to as much as possible. So at the same time, allegory, exaggeration, all of that are tools of the artist and metaphors. So where is the line between artistic metaphor and expression and some kind of truthfulness that we want to convey, especially when it's the environment and climate change and climate crisis and California drought and things like that. So if Karen has any thoughts on that, I'll be really interested in hearing those.
Yeah, no, happy. And I've only gotten to see your work on the internet. I'm curious how big the pictures are, like in the studio. Just those ones are the same size. Okay, cool. Yeah, I really like them. So two thoughts. One, you mentioned, whether or not this is sustainable in the future. And the history of Southern California water, as you're probably aware, is just this like insane story of kind of just collecting water. The Owens Valley is the most famous example, but of really just saying like, we're just going to be collecting all the water from around us and piping it into LA for the purposes of being a city. So depending on how you define sustainable, in some senses never been sustainable, because we certainly have to import the water and from quite substantial distances in some cases. And then now, I think really it's easier to think about the Western water basin as a whole, and beginning with the Colorado River, and what's the sustainability of all of this water. And we're already seeing right now that Lake Powell might be so low that it can no longer produce hydropower in the relatively near future. So we're seeing this huge changes in water availability. I have a very whiny cat, so if you hear that in the background, that's my cat, not my baby. So yeah, and going forward with climate change, it's not clear if precipitation itself is necessarily going to change in its mean state overall, but we of course know that when conditions are warmer, you evaporate more water into the atmosphere, and so we lose water that way. And importantly, you can also you can lose your snowpack, and so that changes, you know, the fundamental seasonality of when water is available as well. Although probably the evaporation from dry soils due to high temperatures is one of the major causes of these limitations in water availability. So yeah, I think as a Western, kind of all of us live out here in the West, you know, there's kind of this grappling we need to have of what does water availability look like in the future, and you know, what can our society look like. So you know, bringing back to Andre's comments, you know, how can we actually evolve as a society given these changing resource constraints to make our lives, you know, livable? How do we be resilient with these changing water availabilities? But then, yeah, I think your more directed question was about kind of the truthfulness of your art, and I think that's a really interesting one. And you know, to me as a scientist, you know, just like thinking about looking at your images, I guess I would naturally think it was true in some sense, and that you'd actually be showing that these are the water levels in the past and this would be the water levels in the future. But I don't think there's a requirement to do that. I don't think that it would be bad to exaggerate. It's just, I think, how you're expressing this information to your viewer. And I don't know in the exhibit how much you, I haven't been there in person, how much you have kind of text or, you know, explanatory information around the exhibit. But I, you know, in some sense, because the changes in California have been pretty substantial, you know, maybe it's actually a more powerful piece of art to just say, this is what we see, you know, as opposed to having to exaggerate anything, since we already have seen in many cases these pretty dramatic changes. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and I don't think there's, you know, at all a right answer. You know, I'd actually be curious, throwing it back at you, if you felt that your pieces, like how you felt about making that decision of the pieces that you did make.
Well, I was thinking, so I was covering with the blue, if you can see on those pieces, with the kind of like 100% capacity of those lakes and reservoirs, but they haven't been 100% capacity, you know, full probably last year or in a while. But you know, so the change that I'm showing is not 1 year change, but it's still a change that happened recently, that it could be, you know, that full, and now it's, you know, what it is. So it's not that I'm completely exaggerating to the point that I'm imagining things, but it kind of like, it's the level of precision that I was questioning myself on where my responsibility lies. I don't know if other artists also have thoughts on that.
Just say one more essentially
on
that. It's just you probably know about the bathtub rings, you know, that you see in some reservoirs where you have like the, you know, mineral deposits basically that show a kind of white deposit, and it's your art it's like a exaggeration of that in some sense. These natural deposits exist, and then you're just pulling them out much more clearly with your modification.
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, Stacey.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I think this is a really interesting conversation about like facts and truth versus beauty, right? So like art has a history of, from the very beginning, the earliest art was communication device, right? And it wasn't necessarily about beauty, although it does get framed that way a lot. And when you talk about art history, you know, there's kind of aesthetics get talked about a lot, and the evolution of aesthetics and styles and that resulted from materials availability, or, you know, the evolution of skill and knowledge, the use of the lens that changed how we saw figures and paintings and all this sort of thing. And we kind of have come so far in that evolution that sometimes art is just about information. Like art has crossed over from being something that was about an aesthetic and communicating, you know, like in churches, that was one of the main, you know, for a very long time, one of the only places that art existed, really, right? Like that was the only acceptable place that an artist could have work, was in a church at one period in history. So I think it's interesting that, like, you know, I feel like there's this many artists in the last 50 years have been creating work that's based on information, performance art, things that stopped being about a beauty aesthetic, right, and started becoming more about communicating in this more like either conceptual way or in a more like, just even graphs and charts or things like that. Like I think about going to Lace Gallery many years ago, before the pandemic, and seeing work that was being presented that was really like more like going to a natural history museum or something. It was presenting like walking paths amongst in the city, and showing tours essentially of the city, and like the work itself was to go out on these tours and walk around. Or like I think about the LA Urban Rangers, like they were a project that happened that was about a confluence of bringing the concept of a park ranger into the city and having you experience the city as if you were in a national park and you were going to look at a geyser. It's like, look at this fire. Oh my God, I can't even think of the word of it. The thing the dogs pee on all the time that the water comes out of when there's fires. Karen, you have a child, so the mush mom brain. Okay, what did someone say?
Fire hydrant.
Thank you. It's like making a big deal out of the fire hydrant and talking about the purpose it had, and so I mean, and that's considered art. Like MoCA supported that project. MoCA, like that we have major institutions who have also supported this idea that information can be presented in an artistic way, and that is also art. So to Natasha's work, I think that you're doing something like that, but you're also making something in addition to it that's beautiful, right? That to look at, or that has an aesthetic quality. I think it's just a really interesting thing just to have out, and to be able to tap into, in a knowledgeable way and use it to your advantage, to be able to say like, oh, I want to present information and I also can do it in this way that's really beautiful. And then you're maybe reaching more people because you're going to reach people who are interested because of beauty, and you're also going to reach people who are interested in the subject. I don't know, and I think Luciana's work is like, some also has that quality. I think I'm frozen.
Actually, I was going to say that, that I love what Karen said at the beginning, that that scientists research and they're, what they find out about environmental issues. And it can be too technical for people, and that, that what we can transmit as artists, we have a way maybe of creating things that we can reach to more people. So I think that's very valuable, and as much, and I also found very valuable what you were saying about all these different sciences that are connected to what you do, as for example, all what scientists are studying about mental health, and how they are studying mental health in relation to people who are suffering from in natural environments being lost. So I think for us as artists, there's so much also to learn about all these fields of what you are studying and discovering. But I also love the fact that as scientists, you are acknowledging that we can help you to transmit all that information, maybe through different lanes of communication, that maybe they may be easier for people to absorb or to understand. So I wish there were more institutions like Brea Gallery or other kinds of institutions and grants and awards that really supported us, and to create these connections between artists and scientists, because I think that's essential in transmitting this message that, of your research. That's all.
I think that it's funny that Natasha and Luciana's their work is almost like opposite each other, and how honest it is. Like hers is totally imaginary, and it conveys these meanings. So you don't have to have that like 100% truth. It's all about, that's the magic of being an artist. We can do these things. We could kind of fudge the line and just to get these points across. And that's what's important. I mean, for me personally, I actually started out in school, in science, and I studied microbiology for like 3 years in college. Then I switched to art because I kind of was like, I didn't like the rigidness of the scientific method and things like that, which is very important. I mean, the scientific method basically changed the world, and so many discoveries and proofs and stuff. But when you look at things in terms of like poetry and things that change people's minds, that you can't use those. You can't be rigid like that. You have to have that ability to think a thought and then go after that thought, and maybe it's not true, but in like theory or the heart of it will come across in a way that is truth. And so that for me, that was a weird struggle that I have. So a lot of my work incorporates certain like ideas of science and things like with the crystals growing, there's evaporation happening. There's I use sound to create resonant structures in the crystals and how that affects the things. And when I play trees that are living in a speaker, and how it's not necessarily about the sound, but it's about the sound vibration that produces the tree, and how it manipulates it, as opposed to manipulating it by hand, by cutting it physically. And that's kind of that idea of environmental stimulus. But those are all things that aren't necessarily true. Like, it's just an idea. So the tree represents a person, and how all these stimulus that are not normal to, or weren't normal to humans until the 20th century, car noise, airplanes, the vibration of the ground when a truck passes by, a trains, like we constantly live in this noise all the time. And so that's just like a metaphor for the tree as a physical person. And so it's not really dictating how the tree grows. It's just the idea of the metaphor of this stimulus that shouldn't be there, that's there. And so whenever people ask like, oh, how's the tree? Does it really help? Does it matter what music you play? I'm like, I don't care what music. It's just about the influence. It's the metaphor of the tree as us, and then all this junk we lived with that humans and they don't, and I think during the pandemic, and whoever got a chance to escape to nature, who hasn't really done it, you realize that the world is quiet, and we've created such noise, physical noise, like audible noise, that like smells, like when you're in the city, all those smells, the restaurants and the garbage and the car exhaust and all these things that we've made that are part of our lives are really not part of, like that's, it is natural because we've done it and we've evolved to it, but it's this weird thing we've created, and we're not evolutionally adapted to handle that really. So it does affect us mentally. Anyway, I think I got off topic there, but it's all, we're artists, we make magic, it doesn't matter if it's true or false. It's more about getting people to think about it, like think about something else, to notice, the reservoirs. I mean, I've driven by over the years, I go through like all these places and see those reservoirs, and like I'm in shock. But then when I get home, I totally forget about it. So it's like seeing those photos of Natasha's, it just makes me think like, man, that is really insane how everywhere. I mean, when I was just at Sequoia taking the photos of the trees, I think it's like Kewanee Lake or something, was just, it was so low that like the lake bed was exposed. And, and you just are like, what? You know, all the docks were just, you know, up on the side of the hill. And it's so hard to comprehend, but you know, it's been happening for years and years. And to be honest, a lot of these reservoirs are sort of like man-made and or man, you know, we put water in there. So, you know, like for LA or for San Francisco, you'd think like in Yosemite, there's the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, which was not a reservoir, it was a valley. And it's a reservoir that feeds San Francisco water to this day. I mean, they filled in like a national park, and just because, you know, San Francisco says we need water, and we do the same thing in Southern California. The thing is, we don't belong here. Like humans don't belong here. LA and Southern California was like made out of Hollywood. You know, the like movies brought people in, then auto industry came in, and you know they started making money. And it's like this, it's really, Southern California is this like fabricated land of like that's hard, like that came from Hollywood. And it's so funny. And so the water and stuff, it's all like, it's almost like an imaginary, like a set or something like that's happening, where all this stuff is coming in to sustain this illusion of, you know, this area where millions of people should be, but there shouldn't be millions. Maybe, you know, a couple 100,000 people should be here, but not as much as there is. So yeah, I mean, like, it's funny to see how everyone handles their work, and you know what they talk about from the show. And when I came, because I don't actually get included in shows like this, like ecology type shows, because I think a lot of, I don't know why, I think my work does have this like weird thing where it just is not seen necessarily as environmental, even though I use all these things that are, but you know, they're really, they all come from formalism and sculpture, and so that's the heart of it. And then the message they bring across is these ideas of ecology. So a lot of the times the form is what dictates where they go. But seeing how like everyone else works, it's almost like intimidating, because I look at all the work and I'm like, oh, these guys really know how to like do these things in a way that is telling these stories of environment and nature. And I'm like, sometimes I feel like I'm just like, you know, throwing stuff against the wall to see if it sticks or something. But yeah, I mean, that's my opinion. I think Natasha and Luciana's stuff is like the way that they kind of play with each other. You know, it's really interesting, the truth of how the truth plays between the two.
Andre, I don't know how you say, you can say that you don't know how you, like your work could be included in this show. I think your work couldn't be more perfect to be in this show. I mean, your work is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's just like out of this world. And it's so unique. I mean, I've never seen a work like yours, because your work is so unique because you actually include living nature. Your work is sculptural, and it's not only like made out of sculpture of inanimate objects, but you include actually really living plants. So, and the contrast between like the very stiff blocks of cement that coming from the human world and this beautiful organic plant that is living, and these incredible structures that just stand in space and they just don't fall. It's just magnificent. So I'm in awe of your work. So yeah, you should be included in all of nature exhibitions.
Thanks, that's nice just to hear.
I
I
agree
mean,
with Luciana. I love the pieces. I think they're really beautiful. They're so textural, like so sculptural, so physical. I don't know. I think their presence is so beautiful in there. And also, I just wanted to comment real quick on, well, throwing stuff on the wall and see what sticks. Isn't that everybody's creative process anyway?
yeah, definitely. That's what we all do.
I know that's what I do. I just happen to be throwing your work at the wall and seeing what sticks. That's my job. No, this is, I feel like the fly on the wall when I get to do these talks, because you guys have such interesting concepts, and the way that you engage with each other and respond to each other's work. That was why I wanted that to be like the primary question, was like, we could certainly spend hours talking about like Natasha could do a whole studio visit, and Luciana could do a whole studio visit, and like we could, I mean, we've already done them, but we could do all of that as part of this artist talk today. But I really just wanted to, I have had like such a relationship with this show for the last 2 months, having it present in the space and being lucky enough to be here every day with it. And every time I go into the gallery, I feel like I connect in a new and different way, and talking to the visitors who come in, how they respond to it, how they react to it. It's been really fulfilling and inspiring to hear like visitors, young and old, talking about, like I said, like they'll come in and one of the first things they'll see is Natasha's work. And they'll respond like, oh, I know this place, I know this place. And then they're like, oh my gosh, look at these charcoal drawings. That charcoal is from a burn site. Like the concept that, an artist can take disaster and turn it into beauty the way that Stacey does. Just like hearing these reactions is kind of really like the exact motivation to put together exhibitions like this. And Karen, I'm so sorry that I couldn't coordinate for you to come and see the exhibit in person, but we're so fortunate to like have your kind of thoughts on like the necessity for art and science to join forces. And like we've all kind of highlighted, we're all able to take in information in different ways and connect with things in different ways. And I was going to be an engineer, Audrey was going to be a scientist, and then we ended up in the arts. And I think that applying these different interests and backgrounds and insights, but all surrounding very similar topics like our relationship with the planet, allows us to reach a wider audience and reach out to people and hopefully kind of get their gears turning. And somehow it's 8 o'clock and I don't know how, because I could literally talk to you guys for hours and hours. And I did have a couple other questions, but I just kind of wanted, like, Karen, I would love to hear a little bit more from you if you have like thoughts or feelings about, this type of exhibition, these types of artists doing the work that they do, potential like intersections of the arts and the sciences. I think that that's why we wanted to bring someone from UCLA into this conversation, is to like, show both sides of how both elements are critically important into this like dialogue, right? And so I just wanted to see kind of, before we get final thoughts from everyone, if you had any more like thoughts or opinions or anything like that on the topic.
Yeah, not too much. I mean, you guys are all, as artists, just doing amazing work. I will just say, if there are times when you feel like it would be cool to get more of, like, if you will, that scientific truth into your work in a way that you can't, you're welcome to reach out to me in the future, and it'd be really fun to have those discussions. But you guys also all, like, something that I think came out really clearly in your descriptions of your work is that you actually do, kind of are learning the science that's relevant to what you're doing. It's like you are presenting truth in various ways in your art. And so, I'm always hesitant to assume that I can really do anything helpful as a scientist for these larger, applications of people thinking about climate, because, the science is important, but what you guys are doing is so important too. But I will just say that I can imagine it could be interesting to, connect between maybe even just like really what we're observing on like a year to year kind of more like very present day basis, and like the level that we have of the scientific understanding of that, which in some cases might be a lot, in some cases might not be a lot, and like figure out how do we kind of communicate more of the what we're observing in art. Is there some way to do that, to really say, so for instance, like the 20, like I said, I think a lot about fire. So Stacey, your work, resonated with me a lot. I also think a lot about air quality. I think that's what happens when you move to Los Angeles and have a child. You start thinking about what's in the air a lot more. But yeah, like thinking about the 2020 and 2021 fire season. So, I mean, those were just insane record-breaking seasons in California. And like, I can look at a graph and be blown away by that graph showing how 2020 and 2021 compared to, previously what we've had in California, let alone historically. But like, is there some way to use art to like show that sense of scale, like to take again that like scientific graph I might look at and really like bring those points, home to people to really understand, in this case, like even know if a step change is a big enough word for it, but just like the enormous change that we've had in our landscape in these last couple of years. And we don't know what 2022 is going to be. It might be the same, and that's pretty scary. Or maybe we've just had an unlucky blip for 2 years. And so that's kind of the one thing that comes to my mind off the top of my head, is just to kind of bring like the urgency of like, this is what we just saw. Let's like take this information, and make this something that people can digest and understand, through an artistic perspective.
It would be really incredible to put together an exhibition very intentionally that would present like that data with artists who are asking artists to make work specifically for the exhibition. And because I do think it does, like if you just walk into a space where there's all this science data, and it's, even if it's presented in nice graphs and things like that, I think that people glaze over after a certain point, and especially people who are not there because of the data. Like nobody wants to look at this stuff, right? Because it's depressing in a certain regard. And so that would be super cool. Like figure out, get funding, somehow figure out to get some amount of funding to be able to, commission scientists and artists to partner and create like someone who's doing fire stuff, or somebody who's doing things on the warming temperature that relates to icebergs, and then put an artist and a scientist together, and through conversation and stuff develop a work that presents both, and that maybe it's just the data is presented and the art is presented, and they're put together in a way that you see them at the same time, or it's an audio that you listen to while you look at the art or something. I think that that's kind of a powerful way. Anyways, I think, Karen, you have a great idea there.
Yeah, I love that. I'll just make one more point very briefly. I know we're running past time, but I think the other amazing thing about your art is that I think it does give, I mean, maybe not in all cases, you'll have to decide how you feel, but there is kind of an element of hope. So, using the charcoal to make the drawing, for example, or just, taking things beyond just the, like, this is all bad news, to say, like, this is how we're processing it. And like that itself is a hopeful idea. Because one thing that, psychologists have told us over and over is that if people just get depressed, they think everything is doomed. People don't do anything. There's no, you don't have the energy to take action if everything just feels impossible. And so there's this like fine balance that we as humans have to find right now, where we're aware of what's going wrong in the world, but also we don't become so depressed by that we can't actually take any action. And so if there's some possibility of in combination with this, also showing like, here's some actions you can take. Here's how to call your senator, whatever it is. I don't know how prescriptive you'd want to be in the context of an art installation, but just allowing people to feel like there's like a way to step from like climate change is doomed to like, here's beautiful drawings with charcoal, to like, let's actually think about getting out of this hole and trying to actually, make some positive changes.
Yeah, absolutely, Karen. I think that's I think that is kind of the next step, right? Like the concept we're working with here tonight, and again, it's just like a tiny blip on the radar of like having this dialogue between you all and showing the overlaps of the scientific data and how it's interpreted and how it's processed by all of you, and through this group exhibition as well, how it's processed collectively. And then, when I've been giving tours of this exhibition and trying to convey what I know about the essence of everyone's work and like the motivations and the intentions, also trying to highlight, there are things to be done, and it's not just, oh, turn off your sprinklers between this hour and this hour or whatever. It is a little bit bigger, and there are steps that can be taken, supporting corporations, like tapping into certain agricultural like types of production that are, especially in California, that are like highly impacting our lives here and our environment here, but also like going to vote and calling out our representatives that make these big decisions, right? There is still work to be done, and there is still hope, and there is still light at the end of the tunnel. And I actually felt really good early in the conversation, Karen, when you said, that the changes you've seen in recent years make you hopeful, because it's more than we've seen in the past. And like, we all know it's not going to be fixed immediately, but I think that keeping these topics at the forefront of people's minds, and you all continuing to evolve and mull over these topics. I've talked with each of you about kind of like where you want to go next with your bodies of work. I think that is what's going to help keep these conversations alive, the joining of art and science, and just connecting with the public. We're all in this together, it's humanity, it's nature versus nurture. So we're all trying to do what we can to kind of live through this time. It always seems like, oh, I'd love to stop living through historic moments. But this is one facet of that's been ongoing, and we certainly won't see the end of it anytime soon, I don't think. So I think that's really kind of helpful, is to keep, thinking about that next step of how can you continue to like be a beneficial factor in all of this. And I did promise you guys I wouldn't keep you all night. So I'm going to stop talking now, but I did want to open it up. Just any last comments from you guys? I'm so grateful to all of you for spending your Saturday night with me. I normally spend my Saturday night doing stuff like this, but maybe some of you have more exciting lives than me. But are there any more like thoughts or comments? Again, I wish we could just kind of hang out for like 6 more hours, but I'd love to hear any last things from you guys. No. Oh.
Yeah, I have. So I think I'm very grateful for you to having me in the show and letting me make new work, because the past 2 years, not just fires and whatever, the world's ending and the pandemic and everything, it's been like incredibly depressing and hard to deal with, especially as an artist. And I mean, my practice is kind of very intensive and physical, and it needs a lot of like effort to do it. And a lot of times, you get in this with the way things are going, there's this funk and it's hard to get out, and having a reason to, I mean, not that I wasn't doing things, but it's just, it was this kind of a motivation to like get back to work and, stop thinking that there's that there's no hope. Like for me, at least as an artist, I was like, what am I doing? There's all this stuff happening. What I do is completely irrelevant. And even though it does talk about climate and stuff, it's like, it was hard to justify spending effort and time and making work when, like you see all these people getting sick and dying and these forests burning and all this stuff. And so it was really nice to be included and be able to sort of shift focus back to making something. And as I was working on this project about the trees and these old trees and stuff. So I had been doing that and going all over California, like photographing the bristlecones and redwoods and sequoias and spending time in those forests. But that wasn't, it was amazing. And I felt amazing coming back, and it was so great. And, I'm not really a photographer, so I'm just doing that and spending all this time on the computer. And that was very invigorating. But at the same time, like my practice was going nowhere. This was just a project I was doing because I believed in it. And I'm like thinking about these organisms that have lived for thousands of years, and they know the world, and we're like these little like ants to them. And so they've seen everything. And that was so interesting to me. But I was like, how am I going to even get that out? Because I don't know if I'm ever going to show work again. Like all these weird things where the show just, it's nice to be able to put some of that stuff in and then make something new and sort of get back to work. You'll see my studio when I do the studio visit. It's not in the best condition right now because it's been a storage site for 2 years as opposed to a work site. So but that's it. It was just, it's great to be able to get back to work and do something that like I be able to show work that I kind of I believe in and has talking about something that we need to talk about as opposed to just putting in something in a show to like get it in a be part of an exhibition. This is really important stuff, and so I'm very proud and happy you selected me after, what was it, 5 years of since we did the studio visit. It was a while ago. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Andre. That was very sweet. I'm so happy to have you guys on the show, and it's been a minute since we first had that studio visit, and I've had you in mind for the show this whole time. But yeah, I just want to thank you all. I resonate with that sentiment a lot. Putting together shows during a pandemic has kind of been like, why am I here? And so to join forces with all of you, and then to have this talk tonight and to get to meet Karen and speak with you, it's been very special. And I think that my staff here and everyone that's kind of engaged with this show feels similarly. So thank you guys so much. Genuinely appreciate you. All right. If anyone else wants to say anything, you're welcome to, but otherwise I do want to set you free. And if you're okay with it, Karen, I'd be happy to share your information with this group, and because you offered to connect, and I think that could be really exciting potentially for all of us, to have like future dialogues and ideas. And I certainly hope that our group here is able to stay in touch in the future, and I really look forward to seeing like what you all produce next and continuing to support your practice and what you're doing. So thank you guys
so much for having me here. This was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed this conversation, so I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys again. And I'm going to wrap up for tonight, and then I will save this for posterity. You guys can share it. We'll link it to our website. We'll put it on our social media, and hopefully a lot of others will get a chance to watch this moving forward and kind of enjoy this conversation we've had. So thank you all again. I hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for organizing this.
Oh, of course. My pleasure.